Good morning.
Good morning.
So we were having a little microphone problem. Does it seem to be working now? Okay, great. Okay, well, what a beautiful morning it is. The sun's out, and but when it was raining, that was also beautiful because we'd had such a dry summer, So, but I really appreciate being invited to come and participate in your spiritual community here, because it's such a joy to be able to go and visit different places and to have the opportunity to share. A spiritual community is one where people gather and they support one another, and we support one another in various ways. We embody love, which we have talked about already in the songs that we've sung. We listen to one another. We encourage one another. We nurture, and we share. We share the grief. We share the joy. We share our celebrations, and we share one another. And one of the ways that we do all of this is through the power of prayer. And so today, that's what my talk is about. Is titled "Let Your Light Shine," because it is about the power of prayer. So today kicks off the first day of the World Day of Prayer celebration, which is this Thursday at Unity Village. And I wanted to talk a bit about that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about my personal journey and the transformative power of prayer, and then about how we let our light shine, how we show up in the world, how do we be the Christ that can change the world. So I think Rochelle gave you handouts, or is going to make them available to you. I wanted to talk about World Day of Prayer a little bit because it's a really big deal for Unity. It's always held the second Thursday of September of each year. And it is a time when the whole Unity community gathers to celebrate prayer, to celebrate our oneness. And so this year you have the schedule of events, which is, or will have shortly, this piece of paper. It starts Wednesday night, and they have speakers, they have activities. Mark Nepo is the keynote speaker. You may know of him from his Book of Awakening readings. They have a banquet. They have, on Thursday is a prayer fair, they call it, and it's exploring all kinds of different modalities of prayer. And then Thursday night, they have a prayer vigil. They have the ceremony, and they have the closing where everybody has a candle, and they have a service. And then, several hundred people circle the fountains at Unity Village with their candles. And then we enter in silence into Silent Unity Chapel, where we pray, and we start the prayer vigil for 24 hours. And so it's a very sacred time to come together. And if you cannot make it, there are other ways that you can participate. If you go to worlddayofprayer.org, which I think the address is on this handout down here at the bottom, there are other ways you can participate because they're live streaming some of the events this year, and you can send in a prayer request, which I'll be glad to take these back to Unity Village with me and add them to the prayer vigil. They have a new app out on your phone where it's free. It's called You Pray, capital U, Pray, and it's both available for Android and iPhone, where it'll dial direct, or you can enter like a text message and enter your prayers, however often you want to. And there's, I think, a meditation on there as well, so for a moment of meditation type of thing. So there's other ways that you can join into this celebration, and I hope you'll consider doing that. And the theme this year is "We are the light of the world. Let your light shine." And this year, World Day of Prayer falls on September the 11th, which is a significant day in the history of the American people. It was on September 11th, 2001, when we were subjected to the terrorist attacks that killed almost 3,000 people. And in that day, our nation, in shock, in horror, and in pain, turned to God with hard questions like, why? And how? And where are you? But we also, in questioning our relationship with God, turned to prayer. We turned inward. We supported one another in prayer, and we looked for comfort. We looked for understanding. We look for healing. And we look for peace. Because as humans, we have this need to connect with this greater sense than ourselves, than our one little piece of the world. And so in prayer, we reach out to do that, or we reach in to do that, but we reach for a connection. And when we don't know what else to do, we pray. So our unity movement grew out of the healing experiences of Myrtle and Charles Fillmore. As you're aware, they healed themselves through the power of prayer. And when that happened, it was a 2 or 3 year period. They were inundated with requests. Teach me to pray. Teach me to pray. I want to know how to pray like you do. Back in that day, there were not, medical science was like zero. And so if you were ill, you had no hope. It was religious healing or nothing. So they initiated letter writing, correspondence classes, prayer groups, a 24-hour prayer vigil, which is where Silent Unity started, and they taught prayer. They taught a scientific method of prayer. So what is prayer? When you think back, what was your first prayer? Now I lay me down to sleep? Or rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub? Or Our Father, who art in heaven? Or maybe, oh God, please help me. Or maybe it was a prayer of gratitude. Thank you. Thank you. It's a very simple word, but when I say the word prayer, everybody in the room has a different idea of what that means. This idea of prayer is shaped by our culture, it's shaped by our background, and it's shaped by our experiences. And so in that vein, I want to share a little bit about my own journey into and with prayer, because that illustrates that. My first career was in science, and so I'm a scientist by education, with a nurse for a mom. And since my youth, I thought this faith healing stuff was a bunch of hooey. It was real woo-woo, pray and you'll be healed. What? How does that work? It didn't work for me in the environment that I grew up in. That was not a part of our family. In my family, we believed in the power of medicine, not the power of meditation. We did not have that type of a basis. It didn't make logical sense to me. When we had a sick calf, I grew up on a farm, and when we had a sick calf, you pulled out the antibiotics. And when you had a sick kid, you pulled out the pills. And, when I was a kid, I had all the vaccines, that were recommended at that point in time. I was protected by the power of science and medicine, not by the power of God, not by the power of prayer. And so my belief system was that was, God was for church and religion and stuff like that. It wasn't for maintaining health. We had a medical system to do that. But since childhood, I always had this knowingness of God. I always knew there was a God. But I had this problem connecting with God. God seemed remote, seemed distant, seemed indifferent to the abuse that I suffered as a child. I felt alone and lost, and the prayers that I did, such as they were, didn't seem to do anything, didn't save me from the problems that I was having, and I didn't feel any closer. And even as I grew older, it felt like I was leaving a message on a message machine someplace, the telephone message machine, and nobody ever called me back. I could not see the effect, the response, the activity of God in my life. Now, I know it was there. Today, I know it was there. But that moment in time, I couldn't see that. So when my health took a turn for the worse, in my middle 30s or so, I was diagnosed with cancer. And I became very desperate and depressed. I was bedridden for 22 months. I, was availing myself of the best that medical science had and getting nowhere. And I was praying because I had set myself on a path where I was trying to find God. I bought a bunch of Bibles, this I don't understand this one, let's get this translation, to keep reading. But I believed that God was not answering my prayers and that I was just, it was hopeless. I was going to be in this condition forever. But one day in this hopeless state of mind, I picked up a book, and it was written by a renowned cancer doctor, Bernie Siegel. You may have heard of him. He wrote the book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And in this book, he described this visualization practice for healing that he recommended for his patients. He employed what I know now today to be the power of imagination, one of the 12 powers, to direct the healing mechanisms of a body. And in one of the visualizations, he directed his patients to imagine their white blood cells seeking out the cancer cells. And when they found one, to wrap its arms around it and say, "Come on, buddy, you don't need to be here," and then lovingly carry it off. That appealed to me, as opposed to the violent, go kill it kind of approach. And in another visualization, he suggested sunbathing in the white light of love. And I'd been sunbathing as a kid. You know, I knew what it felt like to lay in the sun and feel the sun soaking into your skin, and just that warmth and that comfort and that joy that brought. And so I could grasp that. So I would imagine myself laying in bed with this white light cocoon around me and feel it soaking into my skin and deeper into my body, to the core of my being, and bringing this healing to every cell there. Now, I didn't recognize these techniques as anything special. It didn't match with any of the religious teachings I had heard about growing up. But since this man of science, an MD, a doctor, a cancer doctor, was suggesting it, I was open to trying it. I wouldn't have heard it through religious language or through church, but I heard it through the doorway that I had been educated through. And so I applied it as needed. I started getting better. I didn't attribute it to that, but that practice brought me comfort. That practice brought me solace. It brought me serenity. It put me in this place of, you know what, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And I didn't really think any more about it until 15 years later I entered Unity. And I heard Myrtle's story of healing. And for the first time, I realized that I had been practicing the same prayer activity that Myrtle did. Like Myrtle, I was affecting the DNA of my cells with the electromagnetic signals of my thought patterns. I called it quantum physics. Myrtle called it prayer. That was a realization to me, you know, that it works. You don't have to understand how it works. It works. And today, there's a lot of research going on at this juncture between science and spirituality. There's a scientist named Bruce Lipton in epigenetics, which studies exactly that thing, that has done a lot of research, and he's proven that your thoughts can change the proteins in your body because your thoughts produce chemicals, and the chemicals affect the proteins. They have tracked changes in DNA because of that. So, since your DNA is made up of these proteins, your DNA responds to your thoughts. So, for me, connecting the dots, I'm going, oh, okay, so if I pray, I get better. Well, that's like a duh. But, you know, I couldn't get it unless I had all these little dots. And then there's the electromagnetic connection. Your body is an electromagnetic machine. If you think about it, your muscles work because they get, you know, the nerve fires and it causes the muscle to contract. Your brains work on electrical energy. You go to the doctor, they measure that with an EEG. If you get a head injury or something, they want to see what's going on inside there. Your hearts work because of electromagnetic energy, and we measure that with an EKG. So all this electromagnetic energy is in our bodies, and when you think things, it creates electromagnetic energy. And the wavelength of that changes dependent on what you're thinking and the kind of chemicals you're producing. And you know, you've walked into a room and said, oh man, that's got bad vibes in there, I'm not going back. Or, wow, I'm really drawn to this. When you think, the electromagnetic waves of your brain come out about 6 inches from your head because of the skull. But when you feel, when you engage your heart, it goes out about 6 feet, which is how, in the presence of people, we interact with one another, we get in their field of electromagnetic energy, and the wavelengths combine, and they get stronger, and they get bigger, and they get, more powerful. And so one of the things that we do is to engage our hearts. We consciously, in unity, this is one of the things I really love, is that we don't just talk about prayer, we don't just think about prayer, we engage our hearts, and we engage this physical aspect of our being when we're engaging the spiritual aspect of our being in order to change the world. Because these wavelengths go out into the world. And a spiritual community shares a wavelength, a larger community shares a wavelength. There's this thing called the Global Coherence Initiative. It's online, you can look it up, where they will say, at this time of day, we're all going to pray about this. And at this time of day, we're all going to pray about this. And they've got thousands of people that join in and participate in these prayers. This is measurable. There are black boxes planted around the world that measure the fluctuations in electromagnetic energy. And when there is like the terrorist attack from 9/11 or other events that go on, tsunamis and things like that, they can measure the waves in the electromagnetic energy. And they can measure it whenever everybody prays together. They can measure this electromagnetic energy. It's a real thing. We think about prayer I think about prayer, used to think about prayer, as being this woo-woo kind of thing out there. But there's a very real connection to the physical world and how this works. So prayer, is it magic or is it metaphysics? Is it physical? Is it spiritual? Connie Fillmore is the granddaughter of our founders, Myrtle and Charles, and she's the one that put the 5 principles together as 5 principles. Myrtle and Charles had a 40 or 50 or 60-year ministry, and she sorted through all of their stuff and coalesced things down to these 5 principles. And prayer and meditation are the 4th principle. You've heard it said, there's power in affirmative prayer, which we believe increases our awareness of God. That's one way that you see it written. Another is, through prayer and meditation, we align our heart and mind with God. Denials and affirmations are the tools that we use. And the short version that I like is conscious contact. Here we are, God. So Charles Fillmore defined prayer as the most highly accelerated mind action known. And prayer and meditation is the activity by which we may directly experience God. We're tapping into that wavelength. We're aligning our hearts and our minds with the wavelength of God as you understand God to be. It's not something we do for God, but something we do to maintain our awareness of truth. And so, another aspect of prayer that I hadn't really thought about is the doing part. I always heard, if you can't do anything else, you can pray. And I thought, well, that's not doing very much, But there is an element of doing. And another handout that is over, it's here? Okay. We can just set those over there for later. This handout, I've highlighted mine, is called the Tree of Contemplative Practices. And it's from the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society, which is a nonprofit organization to provide education in introspection and contemplation, i.e. prayer. And it's helpful to me to say, well, okay, what is prayer? And when I went through this, and the ones that I highlighted, there are stillness practices in prayer. Meditation, listening to your heart, daily devotions. There are movement practices. The walking meditation, yoga's on here, sports, labyrinths. There are creative practices, which include the music, like we heard, gardening, even cooking. There are relational practices, which is more of what we think of when we talk about ministry, but there's visiting and listening and reading to somebody else. There's influencing practices like leading teams, participating on committees, writing letters. There's serving practices like feeding the hungry. And so there are a lot of ways that prayer ties into each of these doing kinds of things, as well as the sitting still, going inward, and connecting with God. I had given up on God, left lots of messages. But I didn't realize that in my life, every time somebody was doing one of these things for and with me, it was God embodied in that person. My prayers were being answered. They weren't coming in on the telephone. They were coming in the presence of people like you, all coming into my life and bringing me a word of hope or bringing me lunch or, whatever. But that was God in action. And this is the way in which we let our light shine. So when I found unity, I found a path that worked for me because it came in through the back door. It came in through the door that was already open, to me. And I am pretty excited about it. I'm a real 12 Powers nerd, for lack of a better term, because these tools work. They worked for me. And I'm excited that these systems, these practices, these beliefs can set anybody on a path to healing, to wholeness, to a deeper relationship with the God of their understanding, to a richer, more fulfilling life. For me, they've been life-changing. I was not in a place where I was going to last very long at that point. So to sum things up, for me, in very tiny terms, there's one presence and one power. That power expresses in and through and as me, and each of you. We can consciously plug into the power of this presence through prayer, any number of ways, whether it's these ways or the ways that we typically practice. This prayer, affirmative prayer, changes our thoughts, which affects our DNA. And our thoughts also generate this electromagnetic energy that other people can feel. So it affects them as well. So we are the light of the world. And there's a song, you probably heard Eddie Watkins, "We are the place that God shows up." Great song. We're God with skin on. Whether we want to be or not, we are. So God works through us and as us, not just through good works like feeding the hungry or advocating for the helpless, providing shelter, that kind of thing. And that's how we let our light shine, is allowing God to work in and through and as us. And so we hold the high watch. And in unity, the affirmative prayer part, we don't pray for relief of what the problem is right here in the way of physical ailments or material concerns. We hold the high watch. We pray in the manner that calls forth the highest and the best for these people. And so these prayer slips, if you want to, when we do meditation here in a little bit, if you want to put some names on those, if you want to send them back with me to Unity Village, I will add them to the Silent Unity Prayer Vigil for this week's World of Prayer. They'll be prayed over for 30 days, for the next 30 days after that. And they pray, the people at Silent Unity, and we who join them, pray in the manner of calling forth the highest and the best, which is, and I'm going to share what that might sound like. We see these blessed beings as the truth of who they are, one with God, and embodying a spark of the divine. They are whole and they are holy. We call forth perfect healing and prosperity for them as they walk their journey. We see them embodying perfect health, perfect wisdom, perfect love, and perfect peace. We hold them in the light as the love that they are. And so it is. And so in this way, we continue to pray for all of these people. There will be thousands and thousands and thousands of prayer slips like this. And if you're at Unity Village and you would like to join, anybody can come in, stay as long as they want, take a stack of the prayer slips, and as we read each name, we pray in that manner for that person or for that group of people or for that concern, whatever it is that's written there. It's a very healing thing to be able to do for somebody else. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine." And so we want to open ourselves to the light, to be the light of the world through prayer and through meditation. And so we allow this light to come forth as us. Mark Nepo, the keynote speaker, says it's not the study of God that heals. It's the embodiment of God that heals. So living our Christ nature heals us, and through us, it heals the world. And so we're going to go into meditation now to contemplate the fact that you are the light of the world.